Hello my friends, this is Aaron Beverly, aka your public speaking mentor, and in this video I'm going to be breaking down my speech for the World Championship of Public Speaking in 2019. What I'm going to do is cover some of the key parts of my speech and break down the decisions that I made, why I made them, and how you can apply those lessons for your future speeches. In the speech that I gave, I used what is called a one-story model. Other people are more familiar with the common speech model, which is a three-story model or a three-point model. With the one-story model, it gives you a lot more opportunity to build more of your character, build more of your setting, and really establish a connection between the audience and your character. While it is more difficult to maintain the audience's interest throughout the entire length of your story, it is definitely worth the risk if you are able to do it well. Whatever model that you want to use, feel free to use it. This is just the model that I used for this speech on this specific day. All right, now let's look at the speech.
Aaron Beverly, an unbelievable story. An unbelievable story, Aaron Beverly.
The contest chair was relieved. My title is only 3 words long. But friends, why is this story unbelievable?
This whole first part of my speech is all about being different. The first thing that I wanted to be different was me coming out to the stage. If you recall in my 2016 speech, I came out on stage and I was much more somber. I didn't smile, and there were some people in the audience who noticed that. I did end up regretting it later on, but I decided that this time I'm going to come out guns a-blazing, and when I mean guns a-blazing, I mean teeth a-smiling. That small change can make a huge difference in how the audience perceives you when you first come out on stage. When you're coming out on stage, make sure that you're making a positive first impression. Another thing that really set the tone of being different was my attire. I decided to don a kurta, which is a form of Indian wear. Now, clearly this made me different because there was no one else who was going to come out in such bright attire. Later on, I would actually use that kurta as a prop in the speech. Another point of being different. How did I start my speech? I started my speech in a way that we're normally not told to start. I actually started with a joke. Even more than that, I started with an inside joke. The joke being that my speech title was only 3 words long. Obviously, this is a reference to my 2016 World Championship speech in which I gave a speech title that was 57 words long. A title, by the way, which had to be read twice. Now, I did receive a little criticism for using this reference, and that is because everybody in the audience may not have heard my 2016 speech. However, it was a risk that I was willing to take because there was nobody in the world who could use that bit of humor except for me. Also in that opening line was something a lot more subtle, but still different. If you paid close attention to my opening line, you will notice that I didn't say a certain phrase. It's a phrase that every single finalist says in the International Speech Contest. Mr. Contest Chair, fellow Toastmasters, and honored guest. Or another cliche way to say that nowadays is Contest Chair, fellow Toastmasters and friends, and anyone who has ever blah, 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 blah. 2 finalists in the future. Please stop doing that. It is getting extremely old. The principle behind it is that I recognize the contest chair, which I did. The contest chair was relieved. The other principle is that you acknowledge those in the audience, and I did that. But my friends, what makes this story unbelievable? I recognized the contest chair, I recognized the audience, and I was able to easily move into my speech without any need for formalities or platitudes that would add nothing to the speech.
June 2018, I fly to India to attend the wedding of my friend Brandon and his fiancée, Devika. Brandon and family are white, Devika and family are Indian, and I am the only black man there. I can't help but feel different.
In this part of the speech, it was all about setting up the story. I set up the scene, I set up the characters, and I set up the problem. And if you notice, I did so in a very visual way. Now notice the word choice that I use in the beginning of the speech. June 2018, I fly to India. I say those words specifically to plant an image in your mind. When I say June, you're guessing that it's June. And whatever season that you associate with June, you feel that season. You know that season. Second is the year, 2018. I put an image in your head of how old I might be in this story. I also put an image in your head of the number 2018. Third, I say I fly to India. Instead of saying I'm in India or I go to India, I put the image in your mind that I fly to India. The word fly invokes an image because how do you fly? You fly in an airplane. So maybe you see an airplane when I say I fly to India. And also when I say India, maybe you see India as it appears on a map. Or maybe you live in India and you know what your India looks like. Word choice is very important, especially when you're trying to create images in the audience's mind. The better you're able to put images in the audience's mind, the better they're going to connect with your story. In addition to the scene, I set up the characters and the problem. In this part of the story, you are introduced to 3 characters. You're introduced to me as the character in the speech, and you're also introduced to Brandon and Devika. Now, these 2 don't really appear too much in the story. However, they're vital to actually set up the scene because if it wasn't for them, there would be no wedding. I also used them to start setting up the problem. That Devika and family are Indian, Brandon and family are white, and I am the only black man there. And then finally, I set up the main problem of the story that will come back down the line, that I can't help but feel different. This gives you an idea that the story is going to be about differences or a culture shock.
But I try my best to blend in. I buy formal Indian wedding attire. What do you think?
Okay, this is the part where the kurta started to be used as a prop. Normally you have people that have empty gimmicks or empty props where they use the prop, but it really doesn't matter in their speech. They could give the entire speech and it wouldn't change anything. However, my kurta here used as a prop is a little bit different because it puts an image in your mind of how I looked during the wedding. I also used the kurta as a prop to engage with the audience. I asked them how I looked, I waited for their response, and it was just another way for me to engage and connect with my audience.
I even participate in a sacred Indian wedding ritual, protecting the groom's shoes. During the car ride to the wedding, my friend Sunit explains this ritual.
Okay, here again is word choice. During the car ride to the wedding, not on the way to the wedding. Again, image planted into the minds of the audience listening. You see me in a car. You see us driving on the way to a wedding. All of those images are coming to your mind as I say those few simple words. Also in this part, we introduce another character. And there's a certain way that I introduce this character that I'll talk about a little bit more down the line.
When Brandon takes off his shoes during the ceremony, Devika's bridesmaids will try to steal them. The groomsmen protect the shoes from the bridesmaids. If they win, they hold the shoes ransom, forcing Brandon to buy them back.
Okay, here we introduce the rest of the subplot, and I introduce the problem of the subplot. The subplot is the shoes. I have to protect the shoes from the bridesmaids. Also notice how I'm introducing this bit of information to the audience. I'm not just being the narrator telling them about this. That would be boring. That's not going to really engage the audience's mind. So the way that I did it, I introduced it through dialogue. The dialogue came from Sunit, the character in the story. It wasn't necessarily me talking, it was Sunit talking, and he was explaining it to me as a character in the story. This little change is very small, but still very important because it will help the audience stay engaged and it won't be as monotonous as if you told the audience everything. It also is a great way to move the plot along in a faster way. Also during this part, you heard multiple laughs. When I talked about the bridesmaids holding the shoes ransom, I received a laugh that I did not expect. Perhaps I should have paused a little bit more to milk out that laugh, but because it wasn't expected and because I didn't budget for that laugh, I didn't want to wait too long, so I moved over it and I stepped on the laugh. Maybe had I practiced in front of a few more audiences, maybe I would have been able to predict that that laugh would have come and I would have budgeted for it. But just keep in mind that when you're practicing, make sure you know when the audience is going to laugh. That way you can budget for that time in your speeches.
Back. It's a game, Sunit says. I think it sounds like a spy movie. Sunit says, Aaron, the bridesmaids will try sweet talk, they will try deception, but don't give the shoes to anybody. Will you accept this mission? Quick fact about me. When I am given a mission, I take it very seriously. I look at Sunit and I say, I accept the mission.
Okay, this part was all about setups. I set up multiple lines that I would call back to later on in the speech, but I had to first set them up and train the audience to expect them. The first setup was the theme throughout the speech, the spy movie theme. Another setup was the line, I take it very seriously. The third setup was anybody. The sound itself was different. It gave people some audible variety. It was also used as a way to train the audience, because I would later use it as a way to engage the audience and get them to say the words that would come next after they heard that sound. Now, looking back, there is one change that I would have made to this part of the speech, and that was accepting the mission. In that line, I felt that I was too forced with it. It felt a little bit unnatural. If you follow me, you know that I am all about natural delivery. However, that part of my speech, I didn't feel like I gave it naturally. I felt that it was forced a little bit too much, and I was trying to force the audience to laugh. If I could take it back, I would definitely have delivered that line a little bit differently so that I could feel more natural.
At the wedding ceremony, Brandon takes off his shoes. I swoop in, grab the shoes, sit down in the front row. Smooth, stealthy. I feel like a black James Bond.
Okay, in this part, notice how I'm transitioning. I'm transitioning in my speech at the same time I'm transitioning on stage. The audience is now expecting movement, so it adds to the visual effect when you're actually moving as the characters are moving in your speech. Basically, the words that you're saying match the actions that are happening in some way, shape, or form. And if you are an advanced speaker, you probably noticed a rhetorical device that was being used in that part of the speech. I said at the wedding, Brandon takes off his shoes. I swoop in, grab the shoes, sit down in the front row. Smooth, stealthy. Alliteration is a rhetorical tool that you can put in your belt and use when you can. Also notice that I'm using vivid words that strike an image in the audience's mind as I'm speaking. I cannot say it enough. Make sure that you are using the words that will plant the images in the audience's mind. Also, here was the first callback to one of my previous setups. I feel like a black James Bond. This was the first payoff of the spy theme. And not only that, I added black James Bond. Now, I don't know what the science is behind this, but comedians say that K sounds sound funnier than other sounds. K sounds sound funnier. That's weird to say.
The leader of the bridesmaids walks over. She smiles at me. But gentlemen, have you ever seen a girlfriend or wife smile, yet at the same time, you just felt scared? I call her the ominous smiler.
Here we introduced another character. And now I'm going to reveal what I meant by introducing characters in a special way. Normally when people are taught how to differentiate their characters, the most common way they're taught is to change their pitch. However, even though pitch is the most common way to differentiate a character, it's not the only way. Another way to differentiate your characters is to block out the stage, meaning that you have a character and they are going to be represented on one part of the stage. If you speak as another character, they're going to be blocked out and placed on another part of the stage. Now, blocking out the stage for your characters can take a little bit of time, and that time will add up, especially in a 7-minute speech. So it's something that I don't typically do. So in order to be faster, I decided to differentiate my characters just through plain body movement. If you pay really close attention to me as I'm giving this speech, you will notice that as I'm talking as my character in the story, I turn a certain way. Whenever I'm talking as another character in the story, I turn the opposite way. In addition to that, I introduced the character of Sunit and the ominous smiler through very specific body language. When I introduced Sunit, I introduced him as my friend Sunit. And every time I mentioned that character, you saw me do that movement. In addition, I introduced the second character as the ominous smiler. And again, every time I mentioned that character, you saw me make that movement. Don't always fall into the pitch trap. There are other ways that you can differentiate your characters. Also, when I introduced the ominous smiler, I introduced her as the ominous smiler. This was because I felt that it would be a lot more vivid if I gave the character a name that was a trait rather than their actual name. Now, if I said that the bride's name was named Margaret, then okay, that's a nice name. However, if I use ominous smiler as their name, the audience gets the sense in their minds that this person is smiling and they seem nice, but there's something sketchy about them. It's a nice way to add a little color to the characters in your speech. One other point to mention in this speech is the change in pace. In this part of the speech, I slowed down because I wanted to set a different tone. I wanted to set a more ominous tone, no pun intended. And I wanted to make clear the seriousness of the character that was being introduced. As an added effect, it was another opportunity for me to add some audible variety to the audience's ears.
She says, "Aaron, you look very handsome today." I say, "Thank you. Could you pass me Brandon's shoes?" "No." Sunit said the bridesmaids will try sweet talk. "Don't give the shoes to anybody." "But Aaron," she says, "that's against Indian tradition." When I hear that, the global ambassador within me gets nervous. I don't want to cause an international incident over a pair of shoes. I can see the headlines. "Idiot ruins wedding and India-US relations." I almost hand over the shoes, but remember Sunit. They will try deception. "Don't give the shoes to anybody." I say no again. Then the ominous smiler, she moves closer. She says, and I quote, "We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. But you will give us the shoes." I am now scared for my life at this wedding.
Okay, in this part of the speech, you notice that I received multiple laughs, and I wanted to highlight some of the reasons why the audience may have laughed. One reason was the use of exaggeration. When I say that I don't want to cause an international incident over a pair of shoes, that's obviously an exaggeration because I don't think that anybody's really going to cause an international incident over a pair of shoes. But because it's such a blatant exaggeration, it causes a laugh. Now, there was another part where I wasn't expecting a laugh, and that was when I said, "We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way." Looking back on that speech, you can hear the audience laughing when I said, "We can do this the easy way." They knew what was going to come next, and they started to naturally laugh. I should have paused just a little bit longer so to allow them to laugh. What I did, I stepped on the laugh too early, and it probably cost me a couple of more minor laughs afterward. Also, one of the things that may have made the audience laugh was the contrast. Contrast in this case is when I'm setting up one thing and then I give the punchline in a different way, or I give you something different altogether. In the part where the ominous smiler is speaking, you see that she's smiling when she says, "We can do this the easy way," and then she changes, "Well, we can do this the hard way." And in that moment of contrasting information, it generates a laugh.
However, I must protect the shoes because when I have a mission, I take it very seriously. So I curl over in my seat, I press the shoes against my chest, and this is how I watch the wedding for the next 30 minutes.
Again, it's a callback to a reference that I made earlier in the speech. I take it very seriously. And here I have another setup. I curl over in my seat and I clutch the shoes to my chest. The position that I'm in looks really awkward. And there was a piece of feedback that I received that I was giving Toastmasters a new view that they have never seen before. I think that was very good feedback. However, I have to admit that I had zero intention of giving the audience a different view or perspective. This was really just a setup for a line that I would give later on. And I'll point that out once we get there. And again, you hear the audience laughing because of a contrast or conflicting information. They're expecting one thing, but I'm giving them another. When I curl over in my seat, that's how I watch the wedding for the next 30 minutes. But if you look at my position, I clearly cannot watch a wedding sitting in that position. That conflict and that contrast creates a gap in the audience's mind, which then presents the opportunity to laugh.
The ominous smiler tries to steal the shoes, but I hold firm. Then she disappears for 20 minutes before taking a seat to my right.
Here's that audible variety. You hear my change in volume and you hear the change in pace. Those slight changes to your tone and your pace can keep the audience engaged because you don't sound monotonous. And something more that I'll say about the pace. When you slow down the pace, you can also build the suspense. You can build the tension. Use that as a way to keep the audience on the edge of their seat. And let me just note that you don't have to be crazy with your vocal variety or your audible variety. It can be as simple as a slower pace versus a faster pace. It can be loud or low. It can be the change in pitch that we talked about before. There are various ways that you can incorporate audible variety or vocal variety. And don't forget, you can also add sound effects. In this part of the speech, I also have a secondary setup, and it's when I say the statement, I hold firm. It's something that would be used later on in the speech.
She says, Aaron, I don't care about the shoes anymore. You win. I say, do I look like a fool to you?
Okay, here was the payoff for that setup that I mentioned a little bit earlier. I needed a way to look awkward. And because I looked awkward, I looked like a fool. But I'm standing there saying, do I look like a fool to you? Of course I look like a fool because I'm in that awkward position. That was the whole reason why I had that setup. That was the reason why I curled over in my seat the way that I did. It wasn't to give a new perspective, it was to get a laugh because I wanted to use that line. In addition, I hypothesized that some of the humor came from the change in pitch. Now, I know I talked about pitch before with characters, but you can also use your pitch as a way to add a little bit of humor. And again, it comes from the contrast, what the audience is expecting versus what they get. The contrast in this case is that my voice is usually fairly deep. You don't expect me to go into those high octaves. So when my voice does go into those higher octaves, it sounds funny. You don't expect it to come from me. Now, this isn't something that everybody can do, and it's something that you should definitely only do if you feel comfortable. But feel free to use it in your test trials and your practices and see what the audiences think when you use that technique.
But she doesn't move. I think I won. Sunit runs over. He's ecstatic. He says, Aaron, I'm proud of you. I say, thank you. You took this mission very seriously. I say, that's right. Now, give the shoes to me. No.
Now, in this part of the speech, you hear the pace quicken. We're going to start hearing a much quicker pace in the speech from this point forward. However, whenever you hear me give a punchline that I'm expecting the audience to laugh at, you always hear me abruptly stop. So I talk really fast, I talk really fast, I talk really fast, then I stop for the punch. I talk really fast, I talk really fast, I talk really fast, stop for the punch. Pausing for that punchline is going to be critical because you don't want to step on your laughs like I did before. This is a great way to pause, allow the audience to catch up, and maybe even catch your breath. Also, if you're a speech nerd like me and you're counting the amount of time that I'm pausing, you'll notice that this pause was the longest of all of my pauses. And that's because it was the laugh that I was most expecting. When I practiced this line, the audience always laughed, and they always laughed hard at this part of the speech. So I decided to budget that amount of time in my speech so that I could allow the audience ample time to laugh.
Sunit said, don't give the shoes to anybody. The ominous smiler disappeared to recruit backup, and I know a traitor when I see one.
All right, here again, another payoff. We had trained the audience multiple times to expect the word anybody after they heard this sound. Now that the audience was trained, once I did it, they responded, and it was relatively easy to get them to do so. When you're looking for a call and response, always train the audience so that you can get a confident reaction.
Then the ominous smiler pounces. She starts pulling my arm. Sunit joins her. 2 versus 1. They pull, I pull, but I hold firm. The other bridesmaids run over. 5 versus 1. They pull, I pull, but I hold firm. The other groomsmen run over. I think, yes, the cavalry has arrived. but they joined the bridesmaids. 8 versus 1. They pull, I pull, but I hold firm because when I have a mission, I take it very seriously. They said, Aaron, just give us the shoes. I said, never! Keep in mind, the wedding is still going on. Devika's family is watching the ceremony as if nothing else is happening. I start wondering, is this normal?
This is when we get to the climax of the story. This is when we're having the tug of war over the shoes, and the pacing has increased exponentially. I am now going a lot faster in this part of the speech. But since I'm going faster in this part of the speech, you notice that I start repeating myself a lot. And I'm repeating myself just in case there are those in the audience who can't understand me because I'm speaking so fast. Remember, the International Speech Contest is international. This means that you're going to have many people in the audience who use English as a secondary language. By using repetition, I'm able to keep the audience engaged. If you didn't hear me the first time, maybe you heard me the second time. If you didn't hear me the second time, maybe you'll hear me the third time. If you don't hear me the third time, then maybe you'll hear me the fourth time. If you don't hear me the fourth time, then you really weren't listening. And again, even though I'm speaking relatively fast, whenever I have the punchline, like when the groomsmen joined the bridesmaids, I always abruptly stop. But not only do you hear me speaking faster, you also see me moving faster. My movements during this part of the speech become a lot more quick. They become a lot more choppy. In this part of the speech, I'm trying to create a sense of chaos. I'm trying to create a sense of frenzy. So my movements need to be choppy and quick so that I can properly portray that in my body language. Changing how you use your body keeps the audience visually engaged. Another big laugh was the reveal that the wedding was still going on while all of this was happening. This is again another conflicting piece of information where the audience is expecting one thing, but then they receive another. They're expecting that the wedding has stopped and that everything has paused for this moment. But I've revealed that no, nothing stopped. The wedding was going on as if nothing else was happening. This causes people to laugh because they weren't expecting it.
Then the ominous smiler signals the wedding photographer. And this dude is huge. He puts down his camera. Then he starts charging. He jumps on top of me. 9 versus 1. They pull, I pull, but I lost the shoes.
Okay, in this part, I have a reveal to make. I actually lost my place in this part of the speech. If you notice, just ever so quickly, I pause. And then I quickly come back to what I was saying before. I don't know really what happened during this part. I actually blacked out. I was expecting to say one thing, but out of my mouth came something else, and then my brain just went on autopilot. Something else in this part of the speech was the audience reaction. The audience reaction when I lost the shoes. You heard an audible, "Aww." You heard audible disappointment when I lost the shoes. And that's because they were invested in the story and invested in the character. This is one of the benefits of having a one story model. You have the opportunity to build more of the story. You build more of the plot. You build more of the tension. You build more of the drama. The audience has come along so far in this story that they become emotionally attached to the character. They also become more emotionally attached to the goal of the character. And in this case, they wanted me to hold the shoes. One way that I sold this even more was through my body language. I hung my head down low and I lowered my speaking tone. This is something that likely prompted more people to voice their disappointment at that moment.
Brandon paid 10 times what those shoes were worth.
This part of the speech is where I closed the subplot. The subplot was that I lost the shoes and that Brandon had to pay 10 times what they were worth. In earlier versions of this speech, I didn't talk about Brandon paying 10 times what the shoes were worth. And the feedback that I would always get was that people wanted to know what happened with Brandon in the shoes. Because the audience had those questions, I made sure to answer it in the context of the story. If the audience has lingering questions in their mind, they're going to be thinking about those questions, and that's going to prevent them from paying attention to the rest of your speech. Don't leave lingering questions. But here is where I close the subplot, and now we get to move on into the main plot.
But what makes this story unbelievable is not the shoes, nor the events. It is the context behind that game. That game is designed for the families of the bride and groom to get to know each other, which means that among white and Indian families, a different, lonely black man was accepted like family too.
Now, some people said that this was a twist in the story, but it wasn't really a twist. It was that I brought the story back to the main plot. And what made this work was that there was always pieces of information that were sprinkled throughout the story. Once you heard the ending lines, everything really started to come together. Now, this is an advanced storytelling technique, and it took me years to learn how to do this. But if you're able to master it, you will be able to keep the audience on their toes, and your speech won't be predictable. But at the same time, it won't be unstructured, because you will be giving them little seeds of information throughout the story that will then come together at the end. Finally, this is where I closed out the main plot, that among white and Indian families, a lonely black man was accepted like family too. That was the end of the main plot. I now solved that problem, I answered that question, and now I'm able to move on to the message and the call to action. Now, one thing that I will say about my transition to the message, it did happen a little bit quickly. In earlier versions of the speech, it was the bride's grandmother that told me about why the game is played. But I didn't want to introduce a new character that late into the speech, especially one that didn't have that prominent of a role. I think I could have had a more fluid transition to that part of the speech if I had said something along the lines of, I learned that the reason why that game is played, instead of doing it the way that I did it. And that would not have been a very big change, but it goes to show you, if you change a few words, you can create a whole different effect in the speech.
We experience so much divisiveness nowadays that acceptance despite difference seems unbelievable. But there are people who still believe in it. Do you?
In this part of the speech, I actually reveal another setup that happened all the way at the beginning of the speech. It was the title, The Unbelievable Story. I now am telling you what made the story unbelievable. Upon first hearing the title, you probably thought that, man, that's such a cliche and plain title. But it's only in the context of the story that you're able to understand the title means something a little bit different. If you didn't already notice from my 2016 speech, I am a person who likes to use my titles as a way to engage my audience. I don't use my titles just for the sake of sounding pretty. I also introduced the purpose of the entire speech, acceptance despite difference. Acceptance despite difference was actually a recent change at that point. In earlier versions of my speech, I didn't have that at all, but there was one critical piece of feedback that I received that scared me. It was that nobody knew what the purpose of my speech was. When people were asked what the purpose of my speech was, they gave me so many different answers. Because they gave me so many different answers, that was a signal to me that my purpose was not clear enough. So I needed to explicitly say what the purpose was. And what I came up with was acceptance despite difference. Not only did it help clarify what the speech was truly about, it also sounded good because of the rhyme. Rhyming is, of course, another rhetorical tool that you can put in your belt.
Open your culture, your mind, your heart to people who are different from you. Show the world that acceptance, despite difference, is not an unbelievable story. This is your mission. Take it very seriously. Contest chair.
Okay, and here was the call to action and the close of the speech. The call to action was to open the culture, open their minds to people who were different from them. And then my closing line, this is your mission. Take it very seriously. This was a callback to a reference that I made earlier in the speech. But this time I twisted it a little bit and made it about the audience and made it their mission, not my mission. Also notice the tone change. I'm much more somber when I give that line. I'm trying to establish a sense of seriousness. I'm trying to establish a sense of finality in the speech. The one change that I would have made to the ending is that I would have liked to end on a softer tone. Now, it probably didn't seem as obvious, but again, I felt that I forced the ending a little bit too much. If I could do it again, I would probably deliver the line a bit differently. This is your mission. Take it very seriously. I feel had I delivered it like that, it would have created a much different tone to the end of the speech and given it a little bit more finality. Now, the way that I did deliver it was fine, but it was a last minute change. I wanted to end my speech on a higher note. I wanted to end it on a more inspirational note, and I wanted the people to feel inspired when they heard that part. And I thought that in order to get that tone across, I had to be more forceful with my ending. But that wasn't true. I could have ended it on that softer tone, and I think it would have had the same effect, if not a better effect. But it was a slight change. It didn't really matter in the end because I ended up winning the World Championship of Public Speaking. If you have made it this far into this breakdown, I applaud you. You're showing that you are a person who wants to learn what goes into creating a speech at this level. Creating a speech at this level, it takes time, it takes dedication. And as you can see, there is a lot of thought that goes into it. But if you remain diligent, if you remain dedicated, you can make it to that stage one day and maybe even win the grand prize.